about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scam and jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my raw top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosure big hoes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
Welcome, UCY.TV tonight on Voice of Rebellion with Chris J. A complete guide to understanding the destruction of the Middle East. Long in the making, carefully constructed plans have been laid through coups to civil wars and assassinations. A dual compact between the AIPAC control within the U.S. and Zionist-controlled Israel by false faces of ISIS and other powers, including Saudi Arabia, have sought to dominate the region. However, there seems to be major interruptions these last 3 years. Tonight, we're going to take a look at that and more. Welcome, Chris J.
Hey, everybody. This is Chris J here, Voice of Rebellion Radio, and tonight's show is going to be a big one because there's a lot of information. This is a show that really feels weird to almost condense it down to just a 2-hour time slot because the Middle East is made the most complex region in the world. Understanding the many false faces and the many complex who's really working for who. One of the major things that needs to be clarified to understand the Middle East is that the Zionists and the Islamic terrorists are on the same side of the conflict. When we talk about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, which they're more in North Africa, but you see the point. Al-Nusra, all these different groups that we've long associated with Islamic terrorism, well, they all have a root in funding, which goes back to Western powers such as the United States, France, Britain, and a major one, Israel. And it sounds like a non sequitur comment, like it doesn't have much base in reality, but the truth is that Israel benefits very highly from the Islamic terrorism in the region because it gives them the justification to do their horrible stuff because they say, well, at least we're stopping these bad guys. We're the only ones fighting these bad guys in the region. We're the only ones that are truly against Islamic terrorism in the region is what they always claim a lot of times, or at least insinuate. You know, it's the same insinuation like they say that they're the only ones that the Jews are allowed in. They say that the rest of the Middle East is against the Jewish people or is against Israel as a whole, which most of the Middle Eastern countries that they mention are pro-Israel. And it's kind of funny how they don't acknowledge their allies, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, all these different countries, when they are mentioning about who's against whom in the whole Middle East. And the Islamic terrorism, what they mainly do is they disrupt their true enemies, countries that oppose the Zionist massacre of Palestinians and oppose the Zionist homogeny that they're trying to push on the entire Middle East. And these few countries, they put the Islamic terrorists in, and they take them out under the guise of an Islamic uprising or whatever, like what's happened in Syria, what they have tried in the past to do in Iran. And they tried to do the same in Syria. Remember in 1982 when the uprising in Hama against Hafez al-Assad, who is the current president of Syria's father, Hafez al-Assad was able to crush the uprising of a very similar constructed Islamic uprising, which these are false people falsely following Islam. These people are tricked into the ideology of Wahhabism, which Wahhabism has its roots in Saudi Arabia, which is a very close ally of Israel, even though they pretend not to be close allies of each other at times. It's very evident in such issues such as the occupied islands, that Israel occupies Saudi islands, while Saudi Arabia remains silent about the issue. While if, for example, Saudi Arabia had the same dispute with Iran, it'd be a goddamn war between the two. Saudi Arabia has the Wahhabist central thoughts come from Saudi Arabia and distribute this poisonous religious ideology on the rest of the Middle East. But the thing is that Wahhabism was co-constructed with the British, at least the legend says, to destroy Islam. And it goes against many of the Islamic founding principles that you see in the Quran. So ultimately, it was a message really just to divide the Sunni-Shia unity that there had been achieved in the past, but now in recent years they've been pulling them apart. And very few people seem to want to acknowledge that this is a constructed separation of the Islamic countries in the Middle East, and that in reality the people don't have true reasons to hate each other. And you see unity being achieved in Syria and Iran, but you see countries such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and a few other countries in the list of ones more inflicted with the Wahhabist ideology, trying to separate the Sunni and Shia majority, or the Sunni Shia majority that is the Islamic population. And people are probably a little bit confused right now. What is Sunni and Shia? Some people that are starters, well, Sunni and Shia are just the two different groups of Islam, sort of similar to, would be the Protestant versus the Orthodox version of Christianity, for example. I give that comparison because to say Catholic versus Orthodox or Catholic versus Protestant are this similar compared to how Sunni and Shia are would be wrong, because Catholic Church is very different, and I'm not going to go into that, than the Protestant or Orthodox churches. But they just have like a simple disagreement about who inherited the name of Islam pretty much after Muhammad, it's pretty much like a debate about who is the leading disciples, kind of, is what it all comes down to. And the truth is that most Muslims in modern day do not care, but they're still trying to, the Wahhabists are still trying to pull the unity apart, because it is true that if intact Syria, intact Iran, and intact the few countries that are actually part of what, and here's what needs to be talked about, the resistance is truly, there's only a few countries in the resistance towards the Zionist and New World Order plot for the Middle East, and it's Syria, Iran, Yemen, controlled by the Houthis, who are a popular uprising in the last year or two that have started, who have taken over Yemen, took over the capital, but are still fighting off the terrorist embedding regime of Hadi that was opposed. He's still trying to take power and has pretty much set himself in Aden as his base, but the capital, Sana'a, is controlled by Houthis, and quite a bit of territory is controlled by the Houthis. And also, of course, ISIS is in Yemen trying to fight the Houthis. And the thing is, the Houthis for many years have been a major leading fighter of Islamic terrorism against Al-Qaeda, and then later on have been a major force in fighting ISIS after the civil war started, after they took power. And Saudi Arabia came to the aid of Hadi, as also the United States has backed the Hadi regime against the Houthis. And now, with that complicated mess that's Yemen, there's also Hezbollah as a major group that is a non-state entity, meaning that it's not any country. There's no country where Hezbollah is in power, but they are a political party inside of Lebanon, where I'm pretty sure the actual Lebanese government is not very fond of Hezbollah, though. That's the odd thing. Even though they have a lot of power inside that country, when it comes to popular support, they're not actually in power of Lebanon, which is a misnomer. A lot of people think that Hezbollah is in control of Lebanon, but they're not. The Lebanese government is not in support of Hezbollah. And you go over to, and I'll make that clear, the Lebanese government is not in support of Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is it's just a resistance movement against Zionism and also these Wahhabist groups across the Middle East that they've been involved in the fight against terrorism in Syria alongside of Assad's forces and all the different militias that came in support of Assad. That they're in support of the Iranian government and their support of the Houthis in Yemen. Hezbollah has been pretty instrumental over the years, and they kind of got their name, I think, a while back. And today they became a very major force inside of back in Iran and a major force in fighting in Syria. Where in fact, where you see what Israel does, they do a lot more targeting against. Well, they don't do any targeting against ISIS, but they do a ton of targeting against Hezbollah. They actually have helped ISIS on one occasion, where in one situation, Syrian Arab Army fighter planes were chasing ISIS, down, and then Israel interrupted the chase and forced the Syrian Arab Army siege against the terrorists to break up, and then the terrorists were able to escape out into the Israeli-Syrian border. And that's another thing that's very interesting, is that the fact that ISIS is at the Israeli border, but they don't do anything about it. Rather, they go into the country of Syria, deep in the country, to take on Assad or take on Hezbollah or other groups, but Israel won't do anything about the ISIS, what you would think would be a threat at their border. But it's even like they've admitted to somewhat of a truce, is what they admitted, is that they believe Iran to be a bigger threat than ISIS. And Iran is their true foe rather than a constructed boogeyman that they created, and really ultimately is working on their side to destabilize Syria, which has been in the game play for 10 years. I mean, it's been in the playbooks for 10 years. They've been, if you look back at it's been in the plans for 10 years, because you can look back at the WikiLeaks documents, and it reveals that are actually emails that show that there was actually the plans for 10 years to stabilize Syria, long before the Civil War actually started. But the Civil War is a ruse, and the truth was that those protests were constructed, at least that's what I've gathered from the situation, that they were constructed much like what happened in Egypt, where they took control of the protest, and instead of having a legitimate revolution in Egypt against the former U.S. puppet of Hosni Mubarak, later they would just put in another pro-U.S. group, the Muslim Brotherhood, to make it seem like there was a mass change in Egypt, but there wasn't. And now, currently, Sisi's in power of Egypt after the Muslim Brotherhood were deposed in 2013 after a large revolution. Many people took to the streets, and then eventually the military did a coup. Syria, there was supposedly it was protests that the government did violence against, and then they decided to pick up arms and started shooting back at Syrian Arab soldiers. But in my opinion, that's the complete baloney of the mainstream media, is that it was imported. This whole thing was imported, and there was terrorists in it from the very start in 2011. And ISIS is a group that showed up in the middle of it and was formed to what we know of it today. And it seems like it just popped out of the middle of the desert with trucks and everything, and propaganda videos and flags. You wonder where all this stuff is coming from. How do they even get all this stuff? And you see the supplies are coming straight from the United States government. Look at what Iraqi citizens, what people that actually are witnessing the events are saying, that these are American supplies, these are American weapons, and it's American money that's going into the terrorist machine that is ISIS. And it seemed like just overnight they showed up on our news, them executing 1,700 people and all these other horrific headlines. And that was like one of the first things we saw, was them killing like 1,700 people. And it just seemed out of nowhere, wasn't it? That all of a sudden this terrorist group are doing some of the most horrific actions we ever see in the Middle East. But the truth is that they had been in the making for a long time by the CIA, Mossad, and other Western forces. And people think it's all conspiracy theories. People think that's not realistic, what I'm saying. People think that this is all, this is just all in the minds of the people here in alternative media. But the truth is that the lies that have been put on about the Middle East, people have, it's completely backwards of what people think the Middle East is for the most part. There's a few things that are consistent, but most of it is been spun around. Who's funding, who's been spun around, and who is truly behind who has been all spun around. They've designated groups, like, for example, they've said that Hezbollah, for many years, our news has described them to be a heinous terrorist group. But where are these? When did they kill 2,000 people that were unarmed in a matter of months, and stop them from getting water, stop them from getting food? When it comes to them, when did they use chemical weapons like what the Syrian rebels did, along with the Syrian rebels, Syrian terrorists? There's really no difference between the supposed moderate rebels and the violent terrorists that they're supposedly fighting, but in reality are supporting. We had a caller not too long ago debating about that, and he believed the rebels to have been fighting ISIS, but ISIS and the rebels have a ceasefire, and they've been shown to have been working together. Remember James Foley, the American journalist who was later beheaded by ISIS, on the video? Well, who sold him there to ISIS? How did he get to ISIS's hands? Is that he was originally in the Free Syrian Armies. It was the Free Syrian Army, and they sold him over to ISIS. So, with all that in mind, now it becomes a little bit more clearer, and a little bit more clarity and depth has been provided to the situation in Syria. It's a very dark, very bad time right now for Syria. The last 5 years have been they've lost somewhere around what some people say close to 500,000 people or something like that have died in Syria, in a place that has it has tens of millions of people. It's a significant percentage of the population have been killed during the Syrian civil war, with the Syrian rebels using people as human shields. A lot of times they hide in these residential neighborhoods, and they have used chemical. They're the only ones that have evidence of having used chemical weapons against the Syrian people, while they claimed on the mainstream media for a long time that Assad had used chemical weapons against his own people. The UN report, which is going to be biased towards the United States, said no, that Assad hadn't used chemical weapons against his own people. And you look at, they said there was no evidence of it. And only evidence that was ever shown to be was that possibly the Syrian rebels had used chemical weapons against the Syrian people. The truth was that was one of the major ones is the Damascus attack that supposedly happened in 2013. I think it was August 2013. They faked it. Saudi Arabia went in there with like a Hollywood-style movie crew and actually faked the all these images that were being shown to us on the mainstream media of supposedly the chemical weapons attack. On the video that was being shown on the mainstream media of a supposed chemical weapons attack. The truth was it didn't even happen. And now, you see the Saudis have a very major role in wanting to depose Assad. Syria, for many years, has been a competitor on oil, as well as Iran. Which, when you look at it, Syria might be Iran's closest ally. It has been for a long time. Iran was an ally of Syria since the 80s, when it was back then. It was Ayatollah Khamenei and Hafez al-Assad were the ones in power of these two countries, and now it's it's Ayatollah Khamenei and Bashar al-Assad are now the ones in power of the two countries in the Middle East, and they have a mutual defense pact that if one is attacked, the other one will come to the aid of the other. So any attack on Syria is going to be the back door towards a war with Iran, and people don't seem to get that. When you hear all this talk on the news about this, people don't seem to be registering what this really means. When they talk about war with Syria, they mean a war with Iran, and it's probably what it means is an all-out war for the entire region, and we're talking about World War III. And I think World War III has been the footprints. The footprints coming up to it have been shown, and now I think it's definitely been in the planned itinerary for the United States for some time, and probably the late. They're probably planning. I think they originally was planning sometime more in the mid 2010s, and now that's going to be more postponed towards maybe next year, possibly. I think they're going to wait till after the next president has taken place. Next corporate spokesman of America has sat down, which is probably going to be Hillary Clinton, who said that she would bomb Iran 10 years ago. So if Iran she's not worried about that, she's obviously not going to be worried about Syria, because she's not worried about the major consequence that would be of Iran. And these elite are not worried about these consequences of the millions of people that will probably be killed in a horrific war in those two countries. And the Zionists have been pushing for this for many years to get the United States behind going into Iran one day, which Iran is the most powerful country in the Middle East when it comes to in the resistance to Zionism and the New World Order plans, and they might be the most powerful country in the Middle East, even more powerful than Israel when it comes to not made their influence around the world or their wealth that they have, but maybe on the very simple one that when it comes down to on the battlefield, the Iranian military could possibly beat the Israeli military, who, even though they claim are heavily battle trained, the Israeli military, who's their enemy that they fight most of the time? Most of the time, they're fighting unarmed opponents in Palestine. So what they commit is what they're fighting is not. They're not fighting anything. They're not doing a war. They're doing a genocide in Palestine. And yeah, they have all the battle experiences, illegal secret missions into Syria, who they have no authorization to be there, and they are violating all the time Syria's sovereignty, going in there striking the Syrian Arab army. While they claim to be fighting ISIS, they're fighting against the major fighter of ISIS in Syria, which is the Syrian Arab army led by Bashar al-Assad. So the obvious hypocrisy and the obvious lie is evident in these statements by Israel, and Israel probably wants to get the United States involved with a war with Iran, but there's a possibility that I think they always have that card on the table that they'll go in by themselves if they feel like it. But they're going to be able to get the United States military involved because AIPAC, the U.S. president, there's all this influence in the United States. And the last president to oppose Zionism in the United States was JFK. So it's been over 50 years since that. At this point, we have Barack Obama. It's funny that people say that Barack Obama wasn't a heavy supporter of Israel, when during his administration, I think we sent more money than ever to Israel, and we in the United States backed 3 different wars during Obama of Israel massacring the Palestinians in 08-09, was the White Phosphorus attacks in 2012 and 2014, which we saw what happened in 2014, these horrific images, these horrific events, and these horrific news that was coming out of Gaza at that time while they were bombing the very heavily populated area of Gaza City, which, if you look at what's left of the Palestinian territory, they've herded them practically all into very small, really dense population centers where the millions of Palestinians are forced to live, and then when they come to bomb them, they're all in one crowded area, and there's no escape from Gaza. The only way out is by the sea or the Egyptian border, which is most of the time closed. And a lot of times they tunnel out and they try to get supplies from Egypt and come back in, but it's very difficult for the. It's very difficult because the Egyptian military is at best slightly devoted to helping the Palestinians, but a lot of times seem to be more devoted to stopping the Palestinians from getting supplies from Egypt, and by flooding the tunnels and other tactics and blocking the tunnels, not allowing the Palestinians to get through. Syria, on the other hand, mentioning that is that the people that want to escape from Syria at this point, now there's been all this talk about the Syrian refugee scenario and a lot of other stuff, but what's not being told about is that all these Syrian men that stayed back and fought against ISIS and the Free Syrian Army and actually protecting their country from the onslaught by these foreign supported forces that are there to destabilize Syria. And these Syrian men that have many that have given their lives at this point. And the Syrian refugees, it seems to be just a political tool, and it's really, people are not realizing the ugly reason why the Syrian refugees exist and what has been attributed to the destruction and downfall of Syria when it came from a modern country. In 2011, prior to the war, these were modern cities. These were very, very high standard of living in Syria, and now it's a war zone. These cities are destroyed. Syria has really seemed like, especially, well, Syria since the start of the United States intervention in Syria has felt like War III. And it's like War III has already started in some ways. When the United States started, when they intervened and the Battle of Kobani broke out and a few other major events have happened since then, have really felt like War III and the battles that you'd feel like would be part of it. These are gigantic battles with a lot of destruction. And now they're finally getting to the point the Syrian Arab Army is about to take Raqqa, which when that happens, it'll be a major victory for Syria, because Raqqa is the self-proclaimed ISIS capital. Once that happens, ISIS will be pushed out into the deserts for really the first time in this war, where they will. It'll be the second time in this war where the Syrian Arab Army will be this close to winning. Because in 2013, it's odd that when the Syrian Arab Army was very close to victory, then that's when the United States decided that they might have to go invade. So probably when the Syrian Arab Army gets very close to total victory against all the American Zionist-backed proxies in the middle in Syria, then you're going to be hearing all this talk about that they need to remove Assad from power, and they'll be going in for a total invasion. And that'll probably happen next year. They've already brought boots on the ground in Syria, and it's funny how they said no, there would be no boots on the ground, and there are boots on the ground. They said there'd be, and they made it seem like this would be a legitimate fight against ISIS on the media, but look what's happened. It's became a joke. And what they've actually, the Russians go in there and they do way more damage in 1 week than the United States did in their entire, almost, what is it, we're almost going on 2 years that the United States has been there since they came in September 2014. The Russians in their first week of being there did more damage than what the United States has done to ISIS, which they haven't done any damage to ISIS. What they've actually done is attacked the warehouses of food, oil refineries, took out targets belonging to Assad and other Syrian Arab Army sites, tactical sites, and have helped ISIS, especially in eastern Syria, remain in power when they would have been defeated long ago. Eastern Syria, ISIS still has quite a bit of power compared to western Syria, where the Syrian Arab Army is the main fighters over there of ISIS and have taken care of business at this point where Syria is now being regained back to the Syrian government, and no longer the terrorists are sieging land and destroying the country. We've seen with the liberation of Palmyra, and the big ones have been Aleppo. That definitely the Syrian Arab Army and the tide has turned for them, and we are finally starting to see we're finally starting to see in some places life returning to normal in Syria, but it's going to be very hard when the whole country has been bombed out to a point where they're just hollow shells of what these places used to be. Aleppo, a modern city with over 1 million people. Palmyra used to be a city with tons of ancient artifacts and so much more. And just it used to be a huge tourist site also because of all the ancient stuff that was there. Now it's been completely destroyed. Syria has a lot of history to it. In fact, some of the last people to speak Aramaic live in Syria. I believe it's what it's said to be is that they're the last ones to speak the language that Jesus spoke, which was Aramaic, not Hebrew. I believe, I think Hebrew. That's not the original. It's not the original language the Bible was written. I think it was in Aramaic, which only a few people today speak that language. Anyways, anyone wants to call in? We're about a little over 30 minutes into the show. 718-717-8296. 717-717-8296 here at UCY Radio. We have Vince Easley giving out a little shout out here. Just a reminder for the people that didn't tune in last week. Vince Easley will be stepping away on June 5th. So tune in the next 3 shows if you want to catch Vince. And of course, he has his Friday show at Real Liberty Media. They've got 2 more of those, and his final show before he steps away from the radio will be here at UCY, here Voice for Everybody Radio on June 5th. I'm going to go ahead with saying here that Middle East, just like I just have cracked the surface and was talking really mainly at 30 minutes about Syria. People get really confused by the fact that they believe, for example, that they believe that Saudi Arabia and Israel are feuding at each other, but the truth is that they're truly allies that work very closely together. And Turkey, who claims to be pro-Palestinian, but the truth is that they're one of the top 10 traitors of Israel in the world. And Erdogan has been a major supporter of the proxies in Syria that are tearing down the Syrian country. And it's a known fact all around the world, and I think even Americans are coming to the realization that Turkey supports ISIS. We even have our Republican frontrunner at this point saying this very statement. It's because at this point, to say otherwise would be such a far detachment from reality that would be not very many people are going to believe it. When you see that, you go online and there's tons of reports, and it's somehow permeated into the mainstream media that Erdogan, there's these highways and stuff and such where going down into Syria where the Turkish are allowing ISIS to go into Syria. But it goes much further than all that. There's even ISIS merchandise being sold in Ankara, and there's even an ISIS embassy because Turkey apparently recognizes ISIS as a legitimate state and a legitimate country. As it should be reminded, is that ISIS believes that they are a state, but only them apparently is recognizing them officially. I mean, if you have an embassy in your capital, and it goes as far also as that Turkey's been a major supporter of the genocide against Kurds in northern Syria, because in northern Syria is right to the south of Turkey, and that's where they have allowed ISIS to do offensives against the Kurds there. And the Kurdish have been fighting heavily against ISIS during this entire civil war. And the United States acts like that they are in defense of the Kurds, but again, that's only Assad that has the back of the minorities in Syria. And Assad and the Kurds have been on the same side of the Syrian civil war for a long time, because at this point they realize that they need to look aside their differences, and that they need to they need to stick together in order to be able to save Syria in general, and then later they can negotiate whether Syria will become, what kind of autonomy that the Kurdistan will be able to receive in the end. The Kurdish minority in Syria is also going to be part of the offensive against the ISIS in Raqqa, along with the Syrian Arab Army. So it's going to be, looks like it's going to be all hands on deck for this major operation there, which will be remembered as one of the biggest battles in Middle Eastern history, if it's successful, which at this point looks like it will be successful here in the next few weeks. We've seen something like 84 different nationalities have been found to be in the Syrian rebels. It's a foreign-backed mercenary group with representatives from many countries, and many from Israel, many from the United States, many from many neighboring countries on the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. All these countries that are behind that they'll always say that Syria is not a democracy, that they're a dictatorship. These countries can't really be labeling democracies and who's not a democracy, because look at their own countries. Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, all these countries are monarchies, especially Saudi Arabia, where anybody that's a critic of the monarchy gets executed, stoned, hanged. Hanging's a light penalty in Saudi Arabia, as it seems like. People still get medieval punishments, and it's a normal thing still in Saudi Arabia to be stoned to death. Something that we haven't seen a lot of the world in a long, long time. In Europe, in many, many, many years, in Saudi Arabia, it's still a normal thing, and the United States still supports them, and it's one of their closest allies, and it's definitely their second closest ally in the Middle East, behind Israel, which at this point can even call Israel an alliance. Is it an ally of the United States, or is it more like the ones in control of the United States? They definitely have a ton of influence over politicians, media, and many other things in the United States. Even a lot of our products come from Israel. You could see by 729 and 871, I believe, are the two barcodes that belong to Israel. You see those, don't buy them. And technically, apparently, by the laws in the book here in the United States, it's illegal to call for a boycott of Israel. But I'll say it right here, and I don't care about the consequences. I call for a boycott of Israel. I, Chris J, from Voice of Rebellion Radio, once again call for a boycott of Israeli goods belonging to the barcodes of 729 and 871. I implore that we stop purchasing these heinous reminders of the actions of what Israel does to the Palestinians, and we do this one step in solidarity with our Palestinian oppressed brothers by not purchasing the goods of their oppressors. It's like Malcolm X once said, is that the newspapers will have you hating the oppressed and loving the oppressors. And that definitely seems to be the case with the Israeli-Palestine situation. And quite a few other situations around the world as the newspaper. No longer it's the newspapers that are fooling people, but it's the online websites of the same big three media sources. Not even, and still people watch a lot of cable news. But I think it's switched more people are relying on online articles from these big three news sources, such as the CNN.com or your MSNBC.com or your Fox.com. They all have a lot of influence on the internet nowadays, and it really sucks what has happened with with the historical revisionism that you see in the media, where they try to make it seem like that the Israeli state had anything to do with the Allies' victories in World War II, when it's actually that one of the major groups that later would become part of the IDF had actually allied with Nazi Germany during the war, and that there's again the Nazism, fascism, and Zionism connection right there is more shown when you actually look at the facts that one of the major groups that was behind Israel's founding was pro-Nazi, and today Israel funds neo-Nazis in Ukraine. The only group that wasn't closed down after 1933 in Nazi Germany, they had closed down every other political group besides, there only was two that stayed open. Of course, the Nazi Party. Later, the Nazis had just became the nationalists. They no longer were saying Nazi or National Socialism. Just nationalism was the name of the party. But them and the Zionist Federation of Germany were the only two parties still open, and they remained open until 1937 in Germany, when later, after the transfer agreement and all that, they still remained. The support was still remained in the open between the one group. I can't think of it because it has some Hebrew name that is not easily rememberable. And Nazi Germany, that collusion was still open until 1940 or something like that. So this is after already World War II had started, and was openly having a Zionist party all the way on almost to the time of the invasion of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, and the transfer agreement happened almost immediately after the rise of the Nazi Party, which was to send Jews to Palestine in order to conquer it, and they would just have to pay they would have to pay some fee to the Nazis in order to do so. So it was mainly to allow the rich Jewish population to escape Nazi Germany, and the Zionists there was also Zionists supporting bankers that also funded Hitler's rise to power. That money didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere. It came from Wall Street. It came from big Zionist bankers that didn't care about what happened to the Jewish people under Hitler. They just cared about making a rise, making a military machine rise up like Nazi Germany, which probably in one point was in the New World Order's plans to take over the world. I mean, they even said stuff like New Order, Order of the Ages. New Order seems to be the most interesting thing that they would always say. And when you look at the fascist policies of Nazi Germany, it seems like we're definitely on our way to being exactly like them. And definitely we're at a fascist state with corporations in the state being merged in power. There's no doubt about that. And same thing with Israel. They're a corporate and state merged state. They're a fascist state as well. And you don't have to be necessarily a race-based fascist state to be fascist. But I would say that Israel is definitely one. They're definitely an ethnocentric fascist state, much like Nazi Germany. And the United States might not be as ethnocentrically fascist, but there's definitely parts of the U.S. fascist system that are definitely geared against some races, I believe. Modern day, with the profiling of Muslims in this country, and allowing of sentiments of Russophobia, hatred towards Russians and Eastern European people still in this country. There's definitely traces, not even traces, there's definitely parts of the system that are pretty ethnocentrically fascist, and then the rest of it was corporate state power seeming to be merged all across the board. It's fascism. There is no doubt about that. We're at 9:45 already. Hey, Vince, you happen to wander over into the chat room? I just want to see maybe if anybody's got some questions so far throughout the show. I could answer a few. No one's called in yet. Because I think that'd be a good way to do the show, is that probably take a few questions, see what some comments, and respond. Vince, you there?
Okay, now I can hear. Hey, Chris.
Yeah, I can hear you now. All right, I forgot you have to unplug the mic during the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It turns out that I can, if I'm just broadcasting here on my end or joining somebody else in a call, I can hit mute. But when I hit mute going through the Sound Blaster here, it would kill both of us. So, yeah, I was just kicked back listening to you. I was thinking just now as you were speaking about how they set up the scenarios, take the immigrants, the building the wall, the transgender, all this set to pit one against another from scenarios that they created, events, just like you were saying, where Malcolm X had said, where you love the oppressor and hate the one being tormented. And I mean, really, we see that. We've seen such a large outcry against apartheid in South Africa. And, you see the same, much more extreme, not the same, but much. I mean, they've built a wall around these folks over here in Palestine. And like you said, also, kill these folks just unarmed. So what do you think you're going to get? You're going to get a pushback. You're going to get people fleeing because most people, they just want to live their life. Like you said, Lebanon and Syria, wondrously prosperous countries that, people lived in peace. Iraq, even under Saddam Hussein, Christians, Jews, Muslims, both sects. It just boggles my mind that they can play the same, right out of the same playbook, as you said, over and over and over, and people just keep falling for this. And then you set this up, not just years in advance, not decades, but a century and even beyond, where the plans lay. It's just people network. They say, look, man, we can corner the market over here, dude. So back into the drug wars, back in the British Empire and Hong Kong and China, all that. Just continuation. You see people connected. You can trace the Bushes all the way back into even before, certainly at least back to the time of the Opium Wars, right on down the line. You get people that you can collude with along the way, and that spawns off more branches. All these people tie in together, name after name after name. But in the big picture, what we see today, Bill Gates, all right, who is he? He ain't nothing. He's a bug too. I don't care who you're seeing. There's major players, absolutely, but there are great powers greater than them. That presidents, hey, catch a magic bullet, step out on line. You think you can come from this line of Kennedys, these gangsters and thugs and murderers, and you think that you're gonna go against us? The mob ties, all of this, just incredible how. For now, I mean, it's been covered up for so long, but to now it's just so obvious. The face is just blatantly obvious what's going on. To try to make an excuse is beyond. We need to seek alternate.
It's the internet at this point, and all the other ways that you can receive information. With the internet just having all this, so many different websites and so much, online encyclopedias and all this stuff at this point. It's just a choice, I think, to be ignorant. And there's all these lines of people that you can do all this research on, and just people don't even know the one Bush fact. It's like nobody even seems to question, well, who was H.W.'s father? And then you look at Prescott Bush, who had his gold going to Nazi Germany, $3 billion of it, in fact. And then you keep going back, and it goes back to the Opium Wars. I think that's like Prescott's grandfather was back involved with that, with the Opium Wars, and it goes to at least then. It's been a powerful family for like 7 generations at least. Actually, if you look at, and then people don't even know about, a lot of people, even alternative media, don't even know about Prescott's father, Samuel Bush, which now, if you keep track of where that's connection to the Bushes, everybody knows that's H.W.'s grandfather. Samuel Bush was very heavily involved with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. And it would take, less than 5 minutes of research to find out all the things that you just realize that within 4 generations before H.W., there was a Bush involved with the Opium War, there's another Bush involved with the creation of the Federal Reserve, and there's another Bush involved with funding Nazi Germany. And then if you look at a little bit further into H.W.'s early life, H.W. was there at Dallas when you talk about the magic bullet. He was there in Dallas that same day when he was involved with the CIA.
Yeah, there's evidence that may have not been him, but he was certainly in Texas. It's not definitive that was a picture of him, but I would say it's probable, right?
I would say it's very highly likely because of his position in the CIA. He wasn't. I don't think he was a director yet, but the CIA probably had a heavy presence around Dallas that day. As well as other federal agents of many kinds. That's a whole other can of worms,
Right.
They're going into the JFK investigating. You just look at all the circumstances with that.
Certainly. I look at him like an egg-sucking dog. When he was vice president under Reagan, he was really the man behind there. Reagan, he was just, that front man, that face from Hollywood. Great actor, right? I believe that they attempted to take him out as well. What I hear pinging. Okay, come on.
Well,
Don't die.
HW, was kind of like the Cheney of the Reagan administration. It's like George W. would end up being. I mean, he wasn't really the ones that was. Even out those two was calling the shots. Neither one was really calling the shots, but Cheney definitely had a little bit more of actually creating plans. They had George W. I don't think they would trust them with even managing the White House party or anything like that. I mean, George W. was definitely not one of the brightest of the Bush family. Not like H.W., which you could definitely call an absolutely evil genius. Similar to like Hitler or something like that. Just pure evil. And at the same time was a very high intelligence, which made him very dangerous. And that's the problem with when dealing with these people is that they've been able to construct such a elaborately evil system around the world with their high intelligence.
Let me unplug this, man. I'll hand it back to you. Excuse me.
But with how it's been, there's much more of us than there are of them, and a lot of us are near the same intelligence level as them. It's just that they're the ones in charge of the system. That a lot of it's imaginary. The Federal Reserve and the numbers on the computer that ultimately their wealth is. It's not anything more than that. When it comes to the Federal Reserve notes, they're worthless pieces of paper once you look past them. What's it really backed by? It's backed by commodities it's traded in, but it's not backed by anything real. It's not backed by any kind of precious metal. So that doesn't make it a real monetary note. Money is either the precious metal itself or something that can be backed by precious metal, and that's the definition in the dictionary. But currency doesn't have to be backed by precious metal, and its value is determined by the controller of the currency. The alternatives to the Federal Reserve notes, they don't allow too much in this country. There's not too many other mediums of trade, and people don't seem to want to be able to, or don't seem to want to go back to bartering for some reason, which I think that'd be the best way to have, if we ever have a true internal resistance inside the United States against the United States government and against the New World Order, we must barter and stop using their money. And we must have there's many things we must do. We can never let ourselves be unarmed. And, but one of the major things we do is also buying from their stores, buying from their major corporations, their products that come from their major corporations, rather than buying products that are made locally at smaller stores, which we could do with some effort, but we don't. And in that, we're going to be that mindset that we can't do that for whatever reason. For this reason, for that reason, we can't go ahead and do this major step to free our communities from this system of oppression. We need to just be able to do it, and it seems like with a few of these things, it's a cognitive dissonance, isn't it? With why won't people research when it's so easy to research why things are in this country? People simply just don't want to know. Apparently, people want to stay in their little dream world rather than wake up to the reality. Wake up and smell the fucking toast that's been burnt 7 minutes ago. I mean, at this point, it's so late, but we still have time. And it's funny that with the internet having been around so many years, that we don't have it. Just now we're finally some of us in the alternative media are starting to crack through to some of the people, and people are finally have gained an interest of learning what's really going on. And after, it's been literally over 25 years that the internet has been around with many websites. But what have most people been using the internet for? To look at pictures of cats. Their supposed heroes that they talk about, like Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. Do you think they would be sharing fucking pictures of cats? If they were around, or JFK was around, do you think that's what he would be doing with his Facebook? Is sharing some GIF, some cute thing of a cat on Facebook? No way in hell that would be the scenario. But people do. People just go ahead and or the Instagram seems to be the one that's became a real distraction, because if you don't want to read it at all, you literally do not want to see text of any kind besides in a picture. Well, you go to Instagram. That Instagram is really, if there's anything worse than Facebook when it comes to what people do on there, I think Instagram is probably even worse. But I see some people, apparently they put some truthers have actually got on Instagram and actually started putting pictures, similar how we were able to take over Facebook at some times. And at this point we've definitely left some shockwaves all across Facebook. where we're often parodied, but we've definitely gotten the attention of people all across the internet for what we talk about, and it's like the phrase "Bush did 9/11" has became pretty much, it became mainstream. That was actually something that we kind of, we started a long time ago. It took many years, but it finally permeated through and became a meme, something viral. So, and just a little analysis on one more thing is before I get back into the main topic of the show, is the use of the taxation of theft. Didn't seem to really quite get to that meme stats, I guess. It kind of just stayed around the truther circle. I think that in that way, taxation, it's something that has to go. It has to be. I thought it was kind of like a criticism on that phrase, and it needs to be. Because I think that it's maybe a little bit advanced, maybe for some people to get that. Plus it's going to a specific crowd, to the anarcho-capitalist crowd. Maybe we need something. Maybe we need something more speaking about what taxes do, and focusing on the fact that they don't fix roads like they think so, and they're actually going to war. So how about something like, I'm trying to think, like my roads. Oh wait, those are my bombs. I don't know, something like that. If anybody wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. It is a little past the top of the hour. We're a little bit past 50% through on this show. So we are going to start talking about a few other things with the Middle East. Looking at the history of the Middle East and what this all came from, is it's true that a lot of the Middle East came from arbitrary borders, kind of. It is kind of odd how the Middle East is drawn up by European powers a long time ago, because it didn't always look like this. It was recently liberated, a lot of it, from European colonies. They were European colonies till very recently. And the other part, the Ottoman Empire, seemed like controlled the rest of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was in power for hundreds and hundreds of years, all the way up to the War I. At the end of War I, the Ottoman Empire was defeated by the Allies, and they decided to fight on the German side of War I, and they ended up losing, and then it was dismantled just a few years after the war ended, and the Ottoman Empire was split up. And now people say sometimes that Erdogan wants to be the new Sultan, but I think him being the new Sultan of Turkey, he only could wish he could be the Sultan of Turkey, because there's no way that Turkey could ever reach that same amount of influence that they had in the early 1900s. And also is that the Sultan of Turkey was a much more respectable man than Erdogan is today, because Erdogan of Turkey once said, the Sultan, man, that was a pretty bad blunder. The Sultan of Turkey in 1905, when it once offered $150 million by the Zionists to give up the land of Israel, which at that time they controlled, the land of Palestine, which Israelis wanted to turn into the land of Israel. They said that it doesn't matter if they gave all the gold in the world to them, and I think he said something that Allah wouldn't forgive him if he did so, and I will not give up the land of Palestine. So it's possible to assume that the reason part of the reason War I really happened is because they wanted to split up the Ottoman Empire, because they wanted to pave the way to make the state of Israel. And it definitely seems a little bit plausible when you look at the fact of the agreement that was signed later, the Balfour Declaration, where and during the Balfour Declaration, they pretty much was the Rothschilds promising, or wasn't the Rothschilds, is the Balfour promising to the Rothschilds the land of Israel, which the Rothschilds become the major one of the major architects to the state of Israel, making many of the very crucial steps to creating the legal state of Israel. They built the Knesset. They were the architects for the Knesset, and the Knesset, or the Israeli Supreme Court building, is on Rothschild Boulevard. The commemorations to Israel, or the commemoration to Rothschild in Israel, are absolutely disgusting. Aren't everywhere. They're absolutely disgusting, because the Rothschilds are literally the most evil family on the planet. They are the ones that have the trillions and trillions of dollars, and they have control of most of the world's central banks, and they are the puppet masters, the ones that have led to millions and millions and millions and millions of deaths over the years, and is because of the wars they started, because of the genocides they funded. The Rothschilds, very few people know who they are. The school system definitely doesn't tell you who the Rothschilds are. One time actually back in ninth grade, we had an assignment, and I saw the Rothschilds were mentioned, and I saw about the world's richest private fortunes ever, and it had the Rothschilds as the number 2 only in the world history, and it had them below Mansa Musa, which was the world's richest man supposedly ever during the back in the 700s. He was one of the emperors in West Africa. Well, I was going to point out that that's not. It's like the Rothschilds. That's not true. The Rothschilds have trillions of dollars in reality, and they are definitely the world's richest private fortune of all time. But and then I was like saying, it's like, oh yeah, the Rothschilds. I know they've been powerful for a long time. I told the teacher, like, how do you know about the Rothschilds? I stayed quiet because I didn't really want to. I was kind of worried about what would happen if he found out that I was into all the truth or stuff at that time, because at that time I wasn't really public with it. Then I was just really researching. I became more public with it right after then. I stopped. I realized that it wasn't that I stopped giving a shit whether people knew or not, which it somewhat was, but it was really about that I knew that I had to tell people about these horrific things, such as the Rothschild family, Israel, massacre of the Palestinians, and what Saudi Arabia and these Gulf states have been responsible for in the Middle East. This is not stuff that we should keep to ourselves. This is stuff that needs to be spread like wildfire. This is stuff that needs to go viral. It needs to be memed. This is very important stuff. All this stuff here in the alternative media. And now you see that a lot of us, we do these shows once a week. Some of us do a lot more than once a week. And kudos to them, because definitely they are doing their part and up and beyond their part of spreading the truth about the New World Order and spreading the truth about Zionism and all these other topics. And it kind of sucks, doesn't it, with Facebook? It seems like they close down after a while when a page is catching wildfire that is really telling the truth about what's going on. They block the admin, they shut down the page, they do something. And then we lose that page. Like, for many years, it was just simply anti-Zionism. Was a page that put a lot of good memes and a lot of good pictures and a lot of informational charts and stuff. For many years, for like 2 years they did that, but then they closed it down. 2-3 years. They closed it. It seemed like in 2014, 2015, I think they started banning admins because they just stopped posting nearly as much as they had. For example, in 2013, they had posted a lot, and that's when I started posting. And they were posting, and I would take a lot of stuff from their page and post it on mine, share the information that they would share, because it was some pretty good stuff. But they eventually looks like they pretty much closed down, and that's the case with a lot of other pages on Facebook, unfortunately, that Zuckerberg interfered in Facebook. It's definitely not a fair and balanced medium of, the rules that they have. You see people breaking the other rules. For example, you see people do, that technically nudity is not allowed, but you see people post nudity quite a bit, and then they just get their picture taken down, but they're never banned. They're never taken off for a week or whatever. We don't even break the rules, and then we get banned for a week from whatever feature, or sometimes just completely right off of Facebook, where we can't do anything for an entire week. I've been at a point where there was a point where I couldn't comment or like any statuses back in 2013 at all, because I was trolling at that time, I guess. I would go on like Monsanto's Facebook page and talk about the truth about GMOs, really just piss off their workers over there or stuff like that, because that's the only people they would have paid people to defend their PR in Monsanto, and they get really angry when you told the truth. Even the NSA's Facebook page was just, at least used to exist, trolled that. Raytheon's Facebook page, I trolled them, just delete my comments. Because they're a local subcontractor for the military, and they profit off of war, literally, and they're in the region right here in St. Pete, so they make me especially angry. So I felt like it'd be a good idea to troll them. So that's when I got a lot of Facebook restrictions put on me, and then I noticed my Facebook's been screwed with a few times since. One time pretty recently. But definitely that 2013, that was a long ban from a lot of stuff. And you see people break all kinds of other Facebook rules, and they don't get any ban. They just give them a warning, maybe. And I think it all depends about how, I don't have too many friends on the Facebook page. Maybe at this point, they don't worry too much. Not the same as like if somebody has 5,000 friends on their Facebook. I mean, that's probably when they're posting a lot of truth or stuff. That's when they want to shut that down. I just don't go to 5,000. The 5,000 would be, it's too many. It's not realistic. I know I'm not communicating. I wouldn't even be able to communicate with a tenth of those people, because I don't communicate with all 500, 1,200 people on my friends list right now. I couldn't, 5,000 would just be a lot of people that I don't communicate with, complete strangers, a ton of them. But carrying on with the show is, people have a lot of misconceptions about Iran. They have a lot of misconceptions of what they believe. People believe Iran's a backwards Islamist state with no freedom for women, no freedom for different opinions, and that the women are covered head to toe in Iran, which that's not true. In Iran, I believe the rule is that the women are covered. They wear head garbs. They just cover their hair. That's about it. But they're not forced to wear burqas. They're not forced to not forced to wear the total covering to any extent. And people think it's also an Islamic custom. That's not from the Quran. In fact, that whole burqa and all that's actually customs from less than 200 years ago. The burqa is truly a more modern thing that came out of Wahhabist ideology again, which came around in like the 1800s, 1900s, where they'll be for women to be forced to wear that. And Saudi Arabia, they're forced to wear that, and a few of the Gulf states, I think, they're forced to wear that. But they're not forced to wear that in Iran. And Iran has a very modern country, and the people, like, for example, that live in Iraq, that go over to Iran, they talk about how much more modern Iran is socially. They're a lot more tolerant, and Iran's a very modern city, and they are pretty accepting. There are different communities there. The Kurdish community, they have the Christian community inside, even the Jewish community inside of Iran, which most of them are Jewish people that are loyal to Iran, and a few of them have been caught being loyal to Israel and were spies for Israel. And they infiltrated the Jewish community in Iran, but they have them there, and they are loyal to Iran. People think that Iran is 100% anti-Jewish, but that's not the case. As I've just mentioned in that case, and they're not 100% anti-women. Women enjoy many rights there. The Christian community is treated very well, just like they would treat their Muslim community. And the Iranian politics, they have an opposition, everything. It's not like that there's no competition elections and that the elections are completely fake. There's many different opinions allowed, and they have protests in the street, and they don't they allow the fair exchange of ideas via protest and many other ways in Iran. Iran also has the internet. People think that there is no internet in Iran. There is the internet in Iran. A few websites they can't get, but for the most part, they do have that. They're allowed on Facebook, which on Facebook you can see just about anything, when it comes to opinions and such, and they're allowed on it. Iran also has it also, I think that someone has become a little bit more modern over the years. Well, it was kind of back in the 80s, a little bit less modern, a little bit less welcome to Westerners. In the 70s, it was different. Yeah, it was more socially tolerant during the 70s, almost too much. I mean, it was like it could be almost. It was argued that it was almost like a Las Vegas or something, Tehran. But at the same time, while you enjoyed those social liberties, if you spoke out against the Shah in any way, shape, or form, you would be in major trouble, and many people were killed by the Shah.
Yeah, so he was a puppet, obviously, and then they did him like Noriega and so many others all along. But hey, Jules was in chat and was wondering if you're talking on Maduro, and I'm not sure what that is. So does that ring a bell for you, Maduro?
She's probably talking about the president of Venezuela and talk about the situation down there in Venezuela currently.
Yeah. So if
it's not connected with the show right now with the Middle East, but I'll address that with the situation currently in Venezuela at this time, is that they've been slammed by economic sanctions from the United States, and and they can't really trade with many people at this point, and the United States has kind of unleashed this is what seems to be the start of a new Operation Condor inside of South America, where they're trying to target these democratically elected governments and put in these puppets similar to Pinochet and those kind, or Stroessner back in Paraguay. As we see in Peru, they're trying to put the former puppet dictator of Peru, the daughter of that puppet dictator of Keiko Fujimori. That's the daughter of I don't know forgot what the first name of Papa Fujimori in Peru, but that's not his first name. I just said Papa Fujimori. That's the father, the one that was responsible for many indigenous killings inside of Peru. He killed many indigenous during the 90s. He left in 2000. Now his daughter might become the president. In Venezuela, they've also been trying to remove via coup attempts, and there was one coup attempt in early 2015, and they have these constructed protests where the United States is really behind the protest, and they're setting out these rioters out. The burn shit down in Caracas. With the sanctions, there's been some food shortages, I believe, and also there's been looting over the years. Back in 24, up all the way up to 2014, 2015, when they shut down the border, a lot of it was stopped. But there used to be from Colombia, where prices are much higher. They would just go over to Venezuela, where food's subsidized. They would mass buy everything, even though they're not technically allowed to, because it's supposed to be for Venezuelan citizens. And then they would load up a truck and go back home, Colombia, and sell it all for 8 times the price. Gasoline for 20 times the price of what. It'd be more than 20 times the price, because gasoline in Venezuela is dirt cheap, and in Colombia it's more than the United States. A lot of times, I think they get up to like $4 a gallon, quite a bit. Well, right now it's a little over $2 a gallon across the United States. Venezuela. There's a lot of false news coming out of there. I have a few people in the ground, a few eyes actually in Venezuela. They're actually seeing the things firsthand. The reports about the country being at the point of total violence, and that definitely reports that Chavistas are instigating is definitely false. In Caracas, it's pretty tense, but like out in the suburbs and regular cities out in Venezuela, like in Valera, where I have, I guess you could say, a correspondent for Voice of Rebellion. He says the situation is pretty normal there. Last time I checked. And also, you have to remember is that it's kind of an error to say that the Venezuelan government controls the food supply in Venezuela, because a ton of it is actually like only one grocery store. Almost all of it is private, and what's really happening here is that the Venezuelan oligarchy they're like in exile, trying to find their way back to power, the kind of power that they had prior to Chavez during the Perez dictatorship. During the 80s and 90s, they're trying to starve out and kind of use food as a weapon in some of their grocery stores, I think, and kind of they're pretty much saying, like, if there isn't mass change, we're not going to put these items on, we're not going to stock shelves for whatever time. Also, what I've seen, and this is what I know for a fact, is that there's been manipulated photos where they're putting photos that are not even from Venezuela. Like a famous photo, it's from fucking New York. It's not. The truth is that photo is not even showing anything. It's like I could take it, and that's another thing. Is like they show tons of photos of shelves not being stocked and stuff like that out of context. I could get you a photo of down at the Publix on whatever day prior to stocking day. Go over to the very busy Publix where they run out of everything by the end of the week, and there would be tons of shelves all empty and such. So, out of context photos, manipulation, saying stuff that's where it's not. Definitely, there is a situation of some food shortages in Venezuela, but it's being exaggerated by what I've been able to gather from firsthand accounts, and this whole argument that Maduro and Chavez are completely behind it is completely that's wrong, because it's ultimately the right wing oligarchy has been trying to starve Venezuelans out in order to swing the Venezuelan people out of fear back to them so they can go back to the times the Andres Perez era of the 80s and 90s when they had total control of the country. At the same time, they're not talking about what happened for the first 16 years of Venezuela Chavista history. They're not talking about all the public housing or all the people that were able to get an education that before would have been slaves to the horrifically low wages that were in place during Andres and before, people that were illiterate are now literate. And of course, they've reached a rough patch, but that's what happens when you become such harassed by tons and tons of economic sanctions. People believe economic sanctions don't work, or they ignore them. They act like they don't exist when they're trying to criticize a country like Venezuela and try to say that's their economic system being flawed is the reason why it's this way. But they didn't have a problem for 16 years, and all of a sudden they have a problem. In fact, they had very big improvements in 2005, 06, 07. They were really doing good all the way up to really 2013, when I think they were just waiting. I think that probably around 2010, that's when the economic changes started to go to more like neutral. They were no longer really having improvements. But I think the United States really started. They put a ton of sanctions right after Maduro was elected to succeed Chavez. I think the United States was hoping that election would go to Capriles, and then they wouldn't have to even worry about it, because Capriles was supposed to be the puppet future puppet dictator of Venezuela, because he could act like he was going to be democratic all he wants, but when he speaks the same way that Andres Perez did, and Andres Perez is supposedly a democratic leader, what they consider democracies in South America are not democracies. Keiko Fujimori is not a democratic leader if she becomes elected, or it's going to be Kota Kazuki, who is a U.S. businessman, lived like 30 years here in the United States. That he is not he's not for democracy. If you look how he speaks, or you go to Marcio Macri, he was going under I'm for the free market, I'm for democracy. And then when he gets to power, he's acting like a dictator, closing down Telesur in his country, and tightening down, putting a lot of restrictions on the Argentinian people. And as well, just look at Colombia, where it's supposedly democracy there, but I've been there, and it feels there's military checkpoints everywhere, and there's mass corruption, where it really feels like that's a place where if you don't pay off a cop, you might end up in a very bad situation. If a cop pulls you over, you don't pay him off. So that's my answer on Maduro. Going back to my talk about the Middle East, and I guess I could transition over that Venezuela was a long time a big supporter of Palestine and the Palestinian people, and was a harsh critic of what Israel does to the Palestinian people. And Chavez was outspoken and did some pretty big moves against the Zionists, and Maduro is a big advocate of going against the Zionists. So that definitely gives one more motive for the West to take out Maduro. The Venezuelan people and the Palestinian people have a connection with each other, and in fact, there's pictures of Palestinian people having portraits of Hugo Chavez, he's heavily respected in Palestine. He's one of the most respected leader, not from the Middle East. I think he is the most respected leader, not from the Middle East, in Palestine. They don't see Putin or any other leader. Putin, I guess I don't see Putin, May Castro. That would be the only two leaders that they maybe would admire the same way, at the same level. Chavez. It's not from the Middle East. Palestinians are kind of. It's kind of interesting because Palestinians a lot of times are not pro-Assad because they have a similar problem. The people that are supposedly the resistance. Some of them in Palestine are not really resistance. And Hamas, who I'm pretty sure are connected to the same people that were part of the Hamas uprising in 1982 against Hafez al-Assad, are supposedly in the resistance against Israel, but for many years have just given an excuse. They just do enough to give an excuse for Israel to bomb them, and Hamas is anti-Assad. But a lot of Palestinians are also pro-Syrian, as we've seen. The Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine is pro-Syrian, which the Fatah and Hamas are both kind of like fake opposition groups. They're not really into it, at the very least, it seems like. Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine is very into it, but they're only the third biggest group inside of Palestine, and they are also in Syria. They're pro-Assad, and they're a left-wing group, while Hamas and Fatah are. Fatah is just like whatever's popular of the public opinion inside of Palestine, and Hamas kind of goes along with kind of a more Islamist mindset of the liberation of Palestine. Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine is more secular, and really is the way it should be, is what they think of what should be the future of Palestine. They believe in a one Palestinian state, but a secular Palestinian state that doesn't belong to Jews or Muslims, both. That's how, before Israel was created, they had peace between the Jewish and Muslim people for many, many years, centuries. They had peace. And they had a good friendship with each other. But then when the Zionists came in there, they split them apart and told the Jews to join them that were living there. And not all of them did, but they got many to. And eventually were able to brainwash them into hating the Palestinian people. Now you see this divide of between the Christians and the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish people of Palestine, and that's exactly what they wanted. But the Christians and the Muslims, I would say they're one in Palestine, because Christians are seen as second-class citizens in Israel. And people that are Christian and support Zionism are absolute fools to do so. You still run into them even in the truth movement. You see people that are supportive of Zionism and claim to be truthers and are Christian. They say that's why that's why they're Zionists, is because they want to stay on the right side of the Bible, and they only take part of the Bible literally, apparently, because they don't realize that Israel mentioned in the Bible is not the Israel today, and they don't read the part about the covenant being broken, and they don't read the part about the synagogue of Satan quote, that there'll be Jews that will pretend to be Jews, but they'll actually be of the synagogue of Satan. So from even a biblical perspective, support of Zionism is very flawed and wrong. But people do it anyways. And support of Zionism at this point should be seen the same as support of Nazism was during the 40s. Zionism has been and from a pro-U.S. military perspective, or, well, not pro-U.S. military, but a pro-troop perspective. We had the U.S. Civil Liberty survivors on this show. If you're really supportive of all troops, what about those troops that were killed by the U.S. Liberty, or the ones killed during the Lavon affair back in the 50s? And the U.S. Liberty, which I had a couple of survivors here, and they talked about the attack by Israel on their boat, which they were trying to start World War III by saying that they...
Hey, Chris, I need to interrupt you, brother. You got some real bad audio going on there. It's got worse. It was something. I thought you was in the shower, but I wasn't sure. I'm not. Are you moving around, or you got a window open? Is it raining? Are you in a bubble bath? What are you doing?
I don't know what's the case with the audio. I don't know, may try bringing the mic closer to my mouth and see what that does. But yeah, I was just mentioning is that even from people that say they support the troops, what about the troops that were killed by Israel on during the U.S.'s liberty? You know, there's like no perspectives really besides that you are a Zionist piece of shit that there's no I'm I'm pro-American, so I'm going to support the U.S.'s liberties. No, I'm Christian. Or, I'm pro-American, so I'm going to support. I'm pro-American, so I'm going to support the attack on the U.S.'s liberty. Yeah, by supporting Israel. There's no logical stance supporting Israel besides that you are a Zionist, and that's it. That's the end of the story. And if you're a Zionist, that means you're supporting the murder, you're supporting of the illegal siege of Palestinian land. You're supporting what they've done. They've besieged Syrian land in the Golan Heights. And, there's no saying, I'm Christian, so I support Zionism. What about those Christians that are being killed in Palestine? And Christian churches that are being vandalized inside of Israel? Christians inside of Israel are not treated the same as Jews inside of Israel. They might not be treated necessarily as bad as the Muslims in Israel, but they're not treated too much better because it's like it's the standards of what is a first-class citizen inside of Israel are kind of exclusive. I mean, it's like you have to be a white pro-Zionist Jew in order to be treated like a normal citizen inside of Israel. Because if you are, an anti-Zionist Jew, they're not going to treat you too good. If you are a non-black or a non-white Jew, you see what they do. They sterilize the Ethiopian Jews that are in Israel. And then if you are not Jewish completely, then starts going into, they really start treating you bad, especially if you are against Zionism. They'll probably just say, what are you even doing here? And in that case, I don't see no reason for anybody to go to Israel under any circumstance. I would never give my money to them by traveling over there. And even if I was offered a free flight over there, I definitely wouldn't do it because I'd just be afraid what would happen, mainly. Because they do that all the time. But if somebody offers me one, it's like I'm thinking, they're gonna throw me out the plane or something like that at some point. They're setting me up for something. They have all these like sponsored trips and stuff that they give to people to promote their propaganda of Zionism. But people like me, I know that they would be they'd set me up for throwing me out the plane, right into the Red Sea. We'd almost be there, and they'd throw me out into the middle of the Red Sea, which is that. Yeah, the Red Sea. The Red Sea is the one that you float, because it's the salinity of it. You can float without even trying. But that's pretty sure the fall from 35,000 feet would shatter your bones and everything. I guess maybe find a way to get a parachute or something like that before you could. Once you get out there, you can just float for a while. At least you wouldn't have to worry about that part. Anyways, if anyone wants to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. We have about 20 minutes left of the show. With the Middle East, people don't even realize how these leaders got the power. It's been a long time since some of the major events that shaped the political nature of the Middle East happened. But people don't even realize stuff like Syria and Egypt used to be one country, the United Arab Republic. When Nasser was the leader of Egypt, he unified the Egyptian and Syrian people into one republic for a short time. But in the end, it was sabotaged. And then 1963 is when actually the people that the Ba'athist Party in Syria was able to take power. At that time, the Ba'athist Party in Iraq and Syria were still supportive of each other, but they would later split with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein made the Ba'athist Party in Iraq insane, and they had a whole different mindset than the Syrian Ba'athist Party, which are the modern successors to the old Ba'athist Party, which came about in the 1940s, which the ideology is just about Arab socialism, which I had a show about. And Arab socialism is just it's different than Marxist socialism or normal Marxist-Leninist socialism. It's different from that. It's more it's more nationalistic, and it's more about the progression of the Middle Eastern or the Arab people. And there was one also major deviation from the Syrian bossist versus the Iraq bossist. The Syrian bossist decided that they would be supportive of Iran after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, and there was even it was quoted, or Hafez al-Assad was quoted as saying that there will come a day when all Arab countries will be stabbing us in the back, but it'll be the Persians to stand up for us, like the Iranians have been in the fighting against ISIS in the last 2 years. The Iranians have actually been a major force in Syria to destroying terrorism, while the Arab countries are funding it. But back in the 70s, Assad took power. Hafez al-Assad took power in 1970 and was in power for the next 30 years with widespread support of his people. In 82 was the Islamic uprising. Iran, the Shah, the puppet dictator, supported by the United States, brought the power in 1953, again after he had been overthrown before. In 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown. He was kind of like the predecessor, the 50s predecessor to the current governments that have been since the Khomeini regime took power. He was advocating for democracy and for the Iranians to have sovereignty. When he was overthrown in a coup in 1953, Shah comes back to power, kills his political opponents, and Rayatollah Khamenei is forced into exile. I think it was 1963, and he comes back in 1979 after the Islamic Revolution happens. He is brought back into the country, and he becomes the leader and he would stay a leader until his death in 1989. And then Ayatollah Khamenei takes power, and he's been the leader since. In Syria, Hafez al-Assad was in power all the way up to 2000. Originally, it was Bashar al-Assad's brother was expected to become the next leader after he died, but he died before his brother. And Bashar al-Assad, he actually went down a completely different route. He was a doctor, and then he's actually a medical doctor, but he ended up, after taking the call after his father died, and becoming the president of Syria. And he's faced democratic elections. In 2014, he faced an election and won 88.7% of the vote. During the Civil War, people didn't want to change their president during the midst of a major challenge for the country. Other backgrounds: Saddam Hussein didn't take power until 1979. After turmoil in Iraq for many years, and at first, Saddam Hussein was. Well, not even at first. For many years, Saddam Hussein was, for 12 years solid, he was considered an ally of the United States 100%. And at the very beginning, Saddam started clashing with Iran and Ayatollah Khamenei over there, or Ayatollah Khamenei, and eventually Iraq would invade Iran. Started a very bloody war where over 1 million people died, and the United States backed Iraq during the war. And so did the Soviet Union backed Iraq in the war. Only people that gave support to Iran during the war, foreign support, was Syria, North Korea. Syria's support for them was seen as that was a major indicator that there had been a split between Syria and Iraq. That before they were the boss's parties were connected, but they weren't after it was Saddam Hussein. in Yemen, there used to be two different countries. There used to be North Yemen and Yemen. North Yemen was pro-Nasser, pro-Assad, or pro-Ba'athist. Assad had came to power when North Yemen was still around, and later on they would unify. Later, actually, I think they were pro-Assad because they were in power. They would unify. They would unify like in the 90s. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly about that. Afghanistan, the mess. It wasn't a mess like it was before, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up till the 80s when the Civil War happened. The United States sponsored the Mujahideen against the Soviet-backed Afghanistan government at the time, where eventually Afghanistan would fall into the hands of the Taliban in 1992 to all the way up to 2001, when the Taliban was deposed from power by the United States, who brought it to power, and the United States brought in a other puppet government, and now it became pretty much just a failed state. But now the new president of Afghanistan signed an agreement with the United States where the United States will be there until 2024. So they're going to be there for at least 8 more years. So they're not leaving there anytime soon. The United States are back in Iraq with more soldiers. And Iraq, after the deposal of Saddam Hussein, who the United States originally backed, Saddam Hussein was replaced by a provisional government, which later, now the government of Iraq is actually kind of went supporting of Syria and Iran, and they've kind of joined the Iran sphere of the Middle East. And now the United States, it seems to be kind of leaning towards that. Maybe they need to be removed, and it's possible by putting the soldiers there that they're going to possibly facilitate the removal of the current Iraqi government, and they're going to try again and roll their dice one more time, because it didn't exactly go the way that they wanted the first time. I know it's not exactly the Middle East, but North Africa, Libya, and Gaddafi, it's still the political Middle East. Gaddafi was supportive of Assad, and the Palestinian people heavily. And Gaddafi, for what he did, was similar to what Hafez did for Syria, which was bring up their infrastructure and bring up a third world country to the kind of standard of living that they had in Europe and in first world countries, and use their natural resources and nationalize their natural resources, and made it affordable for everyone in the country, where they would have free electric, free oil, and all this, and many social programs, and they had all kinds of stuff. Like if you wanted to open a farm in Libya, they gave you $50,000 and the farm equipment to do so. And they had stuff like long-term maternal and paternal leave. That's stuff that you don't even have in the United States or in a lot of European countries. Libya had loaves of bread were sold at $15 15 cents. They had oil was down to 15 cents a gallon, and all this, and then they lost it all. And now in the last 5 years, Libya has been in control of many various different terrorist groups, and ISIS controls a lot of it. The Gaddafi loyalists are still fighting. They're one of the major fighters of ISIS inside of Libya. But Libya is a complete mess in the last 5 years since the Civil War started. The violence has never really ended. And they said the Civil War ended back in 2011. It's the second Civil War, but it's really just one long, continuous Civil War at this point. I guess you could say two different Civil Wars, because the Gaddafi loyalists have a less role in this one, but they're coming back slowly, and there's a lot of support in the streets of Libya for Gaddafi, and they long for those times again, and I think some of the people wish they didn't back the 2011 uprising against Gaddafi, And now October 20th that'll mark the 5-year anniversary since Gaddafi was killed. And Gaddafi learned from Nasser directly the way to do that, to bring up a third world country to the standards of a first world country. And, kind of also he was made the first leader to really practice Arab socialism by really striving while using with nationalism and nationalization of resources, nationalism with trying to the ultimate goal to boost the standard of living for your people, and at the same time, original socialist lessons, original socialist ideas of providing for the poor while feasting on the oligarchy that existed before, and making sure that the oligarchy loses their power and they lose their ill-gotten gains. In Syria today, we see a country that got so far, but they still have Assad in power, and they haven't lost everything, but they are at the brink of possibly becoming another Libya scenario. Maybe that's why Russia did more to save Syria than they did to save Libya, because the scenario that happened, Gaddafi wasn't able to defend his country from the foreign-backed insurgency of his country, and you see what happened. And the same now in Syria, it looks like they've been able to prevent that from happening. Iran, if that's ever to happen, Russia will back them. Will back Iran's government and stop that from happening, because they don't want to lose one of their biggest allies in the entire world and their biggest ally in the Middle East. Iran is very similar to Syria, and they also have a terrorist group that the United States backs called the MEK, come up, that are supposedly in support of Islamic socialism. It's their ideology, supposedly, but truth is that the ideology actually is just pro-U.S., pro-Israel, pro-U.S., and pro-Islamist. But they've been kept pretty much dormant because they have pretty good intelligence, good military inside of Iran. Iran has really achieved a high standard of living, and Iran has achieved a very high the wealth has a high income per capita in their country. Now, I was going to do something prior to the end of the show. Let me get my phone here so I can actually do it, because I think it's a really beautiful speech, and I just felt like reading the words of a great leader before the show ends. Let's see, pull it up on the phone. This is Muammar Gaddafi's last formal speech, and I just felt, and I never read it on the show completely, and I think we got just enough time to read it. So let me start right now. For 40 years, let me restart. I'll take it from the stop. Let me restart. Okay. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, for 40 years, or was it longer? I can't remember. I did all I could to give people houses, hospitals, schools, and when they were hungry, I gave them food. I even made Benghazi into farmland from the desert. I stood up to attacks from that cowboy, Ronald Reagan, when he killed my adopted orphaned daughter. He was trying to kill me. Instead, he killed that poor, innocent child. Then I helped my brothers and sisters from Africa with money from the African Union. I did all I could to help people understand the concept of real democracy, where people's committees ran our country. But that was never enough, as some told me. Even people with 10-room houses, new suits, and furniture were never satisfied, as selfish as they wanted more. They told Americans and other visitors that needed democracy and freedom, never realizing it was a cutthroat system where the biggest dog eats the rest. They were enchanted with those words, never realizing that in America there was no free medicine, no free hospitals, no free housing, no free education, and no free food. So when the people had to beg or go to long lines to get soup, no matter what I did, it was never enough for some. But for others, they knew I was the son of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the only true Arab and Muslim leader we've seen since Salah al-Din. When he claimed the Suez Canal for his people, as I claimed Libya for my people, it was his footsteps I tried to follow, to keep my people free from colonial domination, from thieves who would steal from us. Now I'm under attack by the biggest force in military history. My local African son, Obama, wants to kill me, take away the freedom from our country, to take away our free housing, our free medicine, our free education, our free food, and replace it with American-style thievery. But all of us in the third world know what that means. It means corporations run the countries, run the world, and the people suffer. So there is no alternative for me. I must take my stand, and if Allah wishes, I shall die if following his path. The fact that he's made our country rich with farmland, with food, and health, and even allowed us to help our African and Arab brothers and sisters. I do not wish to die, but if it comes to that, to save this land, my people, all the thousands who are all my children, then so be it. Let this testament be to the world that I stood up to the Crusader attacks of NATO, stood up to cruelty, stood up to the betrayal, stood up to the West and its colonialist ambitions. And that I stood with my African brothers, my true Arab and Muslim brothers, as a beacon of light. When others were building castles, I lived in a modest house and in a tent. I never forgot my youth and 30. I did not spend our national treasury foolishly. And like Saladin, our great Muslim leader, who rescued Jerusalem for Islam, I took little for myself. In the West, some have called me mad, crazy, but they know the truth, yet continue to lie. They know that our land is independent and free, not in the colonial grip, that my vision, my path is and has been clear for my people, that I will fight to my last breath to keep us free. May Allah Almighty help us remain faithful and free. That was a speech that was the last speech that publicly Muammar Gaddafi gave prior to his demise, and I don't know. I think that was just a really good speech, and I never was able to read it on air.
And it really shows just how when they were bringing up the middle class in any countries over there, once things were really going good, they had to destroy it. Hey, thanks, Chris. We'll see you next week. We got 2 more weeks together. I've been trying to get a hold of somebody with the Bundys, and my friend Bev, Cliven's cousin, has messaged Mrs. Bundy for me. So we'll see if we can't get a guest in for our final show together here. Thanks for listening, everybody.
That would be awesome. Yeah, for our June 5th show, that goes down like that. That'd be a great way for the era of us working together before you step away for a while for that to end. Anyways, we got about 30 seconds left of the show, so I'm going to thank everyone for tuning in to UCY.tv. Just look up Muammar Gaddafi's last speech if you want to read that transcript. I'm going to actually I'm going to find it, copy and paste it, and repost it a few places probably later on my Facebook. Subscribe to Chris Jackson Rojas on Facebook if you haven't done so already. Next week, May 29th, we'll be back here again there'll be a second last show with Vince here at UCY.
For a while.
Point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return.